I pretended to be a broke old woman when I met my daughter-in-law's family. They didn't know I owned the house they live in. They treated me like I was nothing more than a burden they had to tolerate. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. Every morning, I wake up in my small bedroom in Brooklyn, watching the sun filter through windows that overlook the same street where I've lived for 37 years. The smell of coffee drifts from the kitchen below, mixed with the faint scent of my late husband's aftershave that still clings to his old sweater hanging in the closet. I pull on my worn cardigan, the same gray one I've had for 15 years, and shuffle to the mirror. The woman looking back at me has tired eyes and silver hair that never seems to stay in place anymore. This house, these four walls that have witnessed decades of laughter, tears, and quiet moments of solitude, holds more than just furniture and memories. It holds the weight of my entire life's work. Every brick was paid for with double shifts at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, where I worked as a nurse for 42 years. Every floorboard, every light fixture, every coat of paint represents hours I spent away from home, caring for strangers while building a future for my family. But that morning, as I stood in my own kitchen making breakfast, I felt like a stranger in my own home. My son David and his wife Rebecca had been living here for 8 years, ever since they moved from Chicago. I had offered them the second floor, thinking it would bring us closer together. Instead, it had created an invisible wall between us, one that grew thicker with each passing day. I remember preparing a basket of homemade chocolate chip cookies, the same recipe I'd been making since David was 7 years old. My hands shook slightly as I arranged them in the wicker basket, the one I'd bought at a church fair 20 years ago. I wanted to surprise Rebecca's family, who were visiting from New Jersey. I wanted to be the welcoming mother-in-law, the grandmother who brings warmth and sweetness to family gatherings. I climbed the narrow stairs to their floor, each step creaking under my weight. The familiar sound that once comforted me now seemed to announce my presence like an unwelcome intrusion. I knocked gently on their door, holding the basket close to my chest like a peace offering. Rebecca opened the door just enough to see me standing there. Her smile was polite but cold, the kind of smile you give to a door-to-door salesperson you're trying to get rid of. Behind her, I could hear laughter and conversations, the sound of ice clinking in glasses, the warmth of family gathering together. "Oh, Margaret," she said, not opening the door any wider. "Thank you for the cookies. That's very thoughtful." She reached for the basket, her fingers barely brushing mine as she took it. I waited for the invitation that never came. I waited for her to say, "Come in, join us," or "My family would love to meet you." Instead, she stood there in the doorway, blocking my view of the warmth inside. "You're very kind," she continued, "but we're having family time right now." Family time? The words hit me like a slap across the face. I wasn't family, apparently. I was the landlord they tolerated, the old woman who lived downstairs and occasionally brought cookies. I nodded, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Of course," I whispered. "Enjoy your evening." The door closed with a soft click, leaving me standing in the hallway with empty hands and a heart full of questions. Through the thin walls, I could hear voices resuming their conversations, someone laughing at a joke I'd never hear, glasses toasting to moments I'd never share. I walked back down to my apartment, each step heavier than the last. The silence in my own space felt deafening after hearing the joy upstairs. I sat in my favorite armchair, the blue one my husband Thomas had bought me for our 20th anniversary, and stared at the photo albums scattered on the coffee table. The pictures told a different story. There was David as a baby, sleeping peacefully in my arms outside this very house. There he was at 5, gap-toothed and grinning as he helped me plant tomatoes in the tiny backyard. At 10, proudly wearing his Little League uniform, holding a trophy we'd celebrated with ice cream and pizza. At 16, awkward in his prom tuxedo, promising he'd call every week when he left for college. The promises had faded like the photographs themselves, edges yellowed with time and neglect. I had been a single mother for most of David's childhood. Thomas died when David was only 12, leaving me to navigate the teenage years alone while working night shifts to keep this house. I remember sitting at this same table, paying bills by lamplight after David had gone to bed, calculating and recalculating to make sure there was enough money for his school clothes, his books, his dreams. Every dollar I earned went toward building a future for us. When David graduated from college, I was there cheering in the crowd, my voice hoarse from pride. When he got his first job in Chicago, I helped him pack his car, tears streaming down my face as I watched him drive away. When he called to tell me about Rebecca, I was genuinely happy. My son had found love. When they decided to move back to New York, I offered them the upstairs apartment without hesitation. "It's your home too," I had told David over the phone. "It always will be." What I didn't expect was how quickly I would become invisible in my own house. It started small, the way these things always do. A forgotten birthday here, a cancelled dinner there. When I'd suggest we spend time together, Rebecca would smile that same polite smile and explain how busy they were with work, with friends, with life. My invitations became fewer as the rejections piled up. I found myself tiptoeing around my own home, careful not to make too much noise, not to disturb their lives upstairs. I learned their schedules by the sound of footsteps overhead, the rumble of the shower, the slam of the front door. I became an expert at existing quietly, at making myself small enough to fit into the spaces they left for me. The financial support had started gradually too. A loan here and there to help with their moving expenses. Money for furniture when they wanted to redecorate. Cash for vacation trips I wasn't invited on. Each time, David would promise to pay me back, and each time, the money disappeared into their lifestyle like water into sand. I kept a small notebook where I tracked what I'd given them. The numbers grew larger with each entry, but I told myself it was an investment in our relationship. I was buying their comfort, their happiness, their presence in my life. What I was really buying, I realize now, was the illusion that I mattered. Have you ever felt like this? Like you're pouring your heart and soul into relationships that leave you empty? Like you're giving everything you have to people who barely notice you exist? The medical bills started arriving about 2 years ago. Small things at first, a twisted ankle, a persistent cough that required antibiotics. But as I got older, the doctor visits became more frequent. My blood pressure medication, my glasses prescription, the physical therapy for my arthritic hands. The costs added up quickly, eating into the modest savings I'd managed to accumulate. I mentioned my financial concerns to David once, during one of our brief conversations in the hallway. He was rushing out to work, coffee in one hand, briefcase in the other. I caught him at the door, my words tumbling out faster than I'd intended. The medical bills are getting expensive, I said, trying to sound casual. I might need to be more careful with money for a while. He paused, one foot already out the door. Mom, don't worry about it. We're family. We take care of each other. But the next week, when Rebecca wanted new curtains for the living room, guess who they asked for help? The week after that, it was dinner at an expensive restaurant for their anniversary. The month after, a weekend trip to the Hamptons to celebrate Rebecca's promotion. Each request came with the same gentle manipulation. You know we do the same for you, Margaret. We're so grateful for everything you do. It's just temporary until we get back on our feet. But their feet never seemed to find solid ground when it came to paying me back. I started declining some of their requests, testing the waters to see how they'd react. The response was swift and cold. Suddenly, I was being difficult and unreasonable. Rebecca started leaving conversations when I entered the room. David's calls became even more infrequent. The isolation was suffocating. I would sit in my kitchen, which looks out onto the small backyard where David and I used to plant vegetables together, and wonder when I had become the enemy. When had my son's loyalty shifted so completely to his wife that he couldn't see how I was being treated? I tried to be understanding. Marriage changes people, creates new priorities. Rebecca came from a wealthy family in New Jersey. Her parents owned a successful investment business dealing in stocks and cryptocurrency. She was used to having money, used to getting what she wanted. Maybe she simply didn't understand what it meant to struggle for every dollar. But understanding didn't make the pain any easier to bear. The loneliness was the worst part. I would wake up in the middle of the night, listening to the sounds of life happening above me, their television, their conversations, their laughter, and feel like I was drowning in my own home. The walls that had once protected me now felt like a prison. I started taking long walks around the neighborhood, just to escape the silence. Brooklyn had changed so much since Thomas and I had first moved here. The small grocery store where we'd shopped for decades had been replaced by an organic market with prices that made me dizzy. The old movie theater where we'd had our first date was now a trendy restaurant that served small portions on large plates. But Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived 2 houses down, still waved from her porch every morning. Her smile was genuine, her questions about my health real. She had immigrated from Puerto Rico 40 years ago and worked as a seamstress until arthritis forced her to retire. We spoke the same language, the language of women who had worked hard, sacrificed much, and expected little in return. Margaret, she said to me one afternoon as I passed by her garden, you look tired. Everything okay? I stopped, grateful for someone who actually saw me. Just the usual, I said, not wanting to burden her with my problems. She studied my face with the wisdom of someone who had lived through her own struggles. The usual can be pretty heavy sometimes, she said. You know where to find me if you need to talk. Her kindness was like water in a desert. It reminded me that genuine care still existed, even if I wasn't finding it in my own home. But the biggest shock was yet to come. Last spring, I had been organizing the papers in my desk, trying to make sense of the medical bills and bank statements that seemed to multiply every month. I found a stack of mail that had been delivered to my address but addressed to the property management company that handled the official business of the building. My hands trembled as I opened the envelopes, one by one. Property tax assessments, insurance renewals, city inspection reports. All in my name, all for the building where we lived. I had forgotten that when I bought this house 37 years ago, I had structured it as an investment property for tax reasons. On paper, I wasn't just the owner of my apartment, I was the owner of the entire building. David and Rebecca weren't my tenants, they were living in my property rent-free. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by official documents that proved what I had somehow forgotten in the fog of daily life and emotional manipulation. This was my house. All of it. The upstairs apartment where they lived, the basement storage area where they kept their holiday decorations, the backyard where Rebecca had planted her herb garden, it all belonged to me. But more than the legal reality was the emotional betrayal. They knew. Of course they knew. David had helped me with the paperwork when I first bought the building. Rebecca, with her business background and wealthy family, certainly understood property ownership. They had been living in my house, accepting my financial help, treating me like an unwelcome guest, all while knowing that I owned the roof over their heads. The ceramic cup I was holding slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the kitchen floor. The sound echoed through the empty apartment like a gunshot. I stared at the broken pieces, each shard reflecting the overhead light like tiny mirrors showing me fragments of my shattered illusions. For the first time in years, I cried. Not the quiet tears of disappointment or frustration I'd grown used to, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place I'd kept locked away for too long. I cried for all the birthdays they'd forgotten, all the dinners I'd eaten alone, all the money I'd given them that they'd spent while looking down on me. I cried for the relationship with my son that had died so quietly I hadn't even noticed it was gone. But something else happened while I sat on that kitchen floor, surrounded by broken ceramic and broken dreams. A small flame of anger flickered to life in my chest. Not rage, not hatred, but the clean, pure anger of someone who had finally seen clearly. I deserved better than this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my apartment, really looking at it for the first time in years. The furniture I'd saved money to buy, piece by piece. The curtains I'd sewn myself when we couldn't afford store-bought ones. The photographs on the walls documenting a life of love and sacrifice and joy that seemed to have evaporated like morning mist. I stopped in front of the mirror in the hallway and studied my reflection. When had I become so small? When had I learned to apologize for taking up space in my own life? The woman looking back at me had kind eyes but tired shoulders. She had spent 73 years taking care of everyone else and had forgotten to save any care for herself. She had built a life, raised a son, survived widowhood, worked until her hands were stiff with arthritis, and somehow along the way, she had disappeared. But she was still there. Buried under years of being told she was too much, too needy, too difficult, but still there. The next morning, I called the bank to confirm what I already knew. The house was in my name, had always been in my name, and would remain in my name until I decided otherwise. The property taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, all my responsibility, all my financial burden, all my legal right to control. I made copies of all the documents, organizing them in a folder that I kept on my kitchen table where I could see it every morning. Physical proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't imagining things, wasn't being difficult. I was the owner of this building, and I had been letting myself be treated like a charity case in my own home. But knowing the truth and acting on it are two different things entirely. Fear crept in during my quiet moments. What if I confronted them and they left? What if standing up for myself meant losing my son forever? What if being alone was worse than being invisible? I had spent my entire adult life avoiding conflict, smoothing over problems, making excuses for other people's bad behavior. The idea of direct confrontation made my stomach clench with anxiety. But the alternative, continuing to live as a ghost in my own home, felt like a kind of death. The turning point came 3 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon. I had been feeling dizzy all morning, probably a side effect of the new blood pressure medication my doctor had prescribed. I was coming up from the basement, where I'd been doing laundry, when the world started spinning. I grabbed for the handrail, missed, and tumbled down the last 3 steps. I lay on the basement floor for several minutes, not seriously injured but shaken and embarrassed. My hip ached where I'd hit the concrete, and my wrist burned from trying to break my fall. I called out for help, knowing David and Rebecca were upstairs. "Hello? Can someone help me?" No answer. I could hear their television playing, could hear Rebecca laughing at something on the screen. I tried again, louder this time. "David? Rebecca? I've fallen." Still nothing. It took me nearly 10 minutes to get back on my feet. My hip screamed in protest as I climbed the stairs to the main floor, then climbed again to their apartment. I knocked on their door, breathing heavily from the exertion and pain. Rebecca answered, looking annoyed at the interruption. I fell down the basement stairs, I said, my voice shaking. I think I might need to see a doctor. She looked at me with the same expression she might give to a stranger asking for directions. Oh, that's unfortunate, she said. Do you need me to call you a cab? A cab. Not, let me drive you to the hospital. Not, David, your mother is hurt. Not even, come in and sit down while we figure this out. A cab. Actually, I said, my voice stronger than I felt, I think I'd like David to take me. She disappeared back into the apartment, and I could hear muffled conversation. A few minutes later, David appeared at the door, car keys in his hand, looking like I had just asked him to donate a kidney. Mom, I've got that conference call in an hour, he said, jangling the keys impatiently. Can't this wait? This. My potential injury. My pain. My need for help was this that could wait for a more convenient time. I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I had rocked to sleep every night after his father died, the teenager I had driven to every soccer practice and school play, the young man whose college tuition I had paid by working overtime shifts until my feet swelled with exhaustion, and I saw a stranger. No, I said. It can't wait. He drove me to the urgent care clinic in silence, checking his phone at red lights, sighing when the wait was longer than he'd expected. The doctor determined that I had a minor sprain and some bruising, nothing that required immediate treatment but something that would be painful for several days. On the drive home, David finally spoke. You know, Mom, maybe it's time to think about those senior living communities we talked about. This house is getting too much for you to handle on your own. Senior living communities we had never talked about. He was rewriting history, creating conversations that had never happened, planting ideas that would solve his problems more than mine. This is my house, David, I said quietly. I know that, he said, irritation creeping into his voice. But it's a lot of responsibility. You're not getting any younger. You're not getting any younger. The phrase landed like a punch to my already aching ribs. When had my age become a reason to dismiss me rather than respect my experience? That night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and the folder of property documents. I spread them across the table like a tarot reading, looking for answers in the legal language and official seals. I owned this house. I had always owned this house. But somewhere along the way, I had given away my authority over my own life. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I called a tenant advocacy office in Manhattan and explained my situation. The woman who answered the phone, Sarah, listened patiently as I struggled to put words to my confusion and pain. Let me understand this correctly, she said when I finished. You own the building, your son and daughter-in-law live upstairs rent-free, they accept financial help from you regularly, but they treat you like you're a burden on their generosity? Hearing it stated so plainly made the absurdity impossible to ignore. Yes, I said. That's exactly what's happening. Mrs. Chen, she said, using the name I'd given her, you have more rights than you realize. And more power than they want you to know. Sarah connected me with a legal aid attorney who specialized in elder advocacy and property rights. His name was Marcus Torres, and he had been helping seniors like me for 15 years. His office was in a building near Brooklyn Heights, where I sat across from his desk 3 days later, still wearing my old gray cardigan like armor. The good news, Marcus said after reviewing my documents, is that everything is very clear legally. You are the sole owner of this property. Your son and daughter-in-law are essentially your guests, staying there at your pleasure. The challenging news, he continued, is that family situations like this rarely respond well to legal pressure alone. Have you considered having a direct conversation with them about your expectations? A direct conversation. The phrase made my palms sweat. I had been avoiding direct conversations my entire life, believing that keeping peace was more important than keeping my dignity. I don't know how, I admitted. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me with kind but serious eyes. Mrs. Chen, how long have you been afraid of your own son? The question hit me like cold water. Had I been afraid of David? Or afraid of losing him? Afraid of being alone? Afraid of being seen as difficult or demanding or unreasonable? I don't want to lose him, I whispered. Have you considered, Marcus asked gently, that you might have already lost him? I walked home from his office through Prospect Park, letting his words settle into my consciousness like seeds in fertile soil. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting moving shadows on the path ahead of me. Joggers passed by, couples walked hand in hand, children played while their parents watched from benches. All around me, life was happening. Genuine connections, real relationships, authentic care. And I was walking through it like a ghost, invisible and untouched by any of it. That evening, I made myself a proper dinner for the first time in months. Not a sandwich eaten standing at the counter, not leftovers reheated in the microwave, but a real meal at my dining room table with a cloth napkin and flowers from Mrs. Rodriguez's garden. I ate slowly, tasting every bite, letting myself enjoy the simple pleasure of nourishment and solitude. The house was quiet except for the gentle sounds from upstairs, their television, their footsteps, their life continuing without any awareness of my existence. But for the first time, their ignorance of me didn't feel like rejection. It felt like freedom. After dinner, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old friend Helen, who had retired from the hospital the same year I did and moved to a senior community in New Jersey. "Margaret," she said, her voice bright with surprise. "I was just thinking about you. How are you, honey?" How was I? The question used to make me launch into complaints about my loneliness and confusion. Tonight, it made me pause and consider what was actually true. "I'm figuring some things out," I said. We talked for over an hour, and Helen told me about her life in the retirement community. Not the depressing warehouse for discarded elderly people I had imagined, but a vibrant place where she had made new friends, taken up watercolor painting, and joined a book club. "You know what the best part is?" she said. "Nobody here takes me for granted. We're all starting over in some way, so we pay attention to each other. We see each other." After we hung up, I sat in my living room looking at the photographs on the side table. Pictures of David as a baby, as a child, as a young man. But no recent photos. No pictures of us together in the last 5 years, no images of shared holidays or celebrations. Because there hadn't been any. I gathered up the photo albums and carried them to my bedroom, storing them in the closet next to Thomas's old sweater. Not throwing them away, not destroying the memories, but putting them where they belonged, in the past. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I knew what I needed to do, and I knew I had the strength to do it. I started with small changes. I stopped asking if they needed anything when I went to the grocery store. I stopped offering to help with their errands or lending them money when they hinted at financial problems. I stopped apologizing for existing in my own house. The response was immediate and predictable. Rebecca's polite distance became cold hostility. David's casual dismissal became impatient irritation. But something strange happened as they pulled further away. I stopped feeling desperate to pull them back. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't trying to earn love through service, buy affection with sacrifice, or maintain relationships through self-erasure. I was simply existing as myself, taking up space in my own life without apology. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The confrontation I had been dreading finally came on a Sunday evening in early fall. David knocked on my door, his face tight with frustration. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, pushing past me into my living room without invitation. Rebecca followed behind him, her expression carefully neutral but her body language radiating annoyance. They sat on my couch like they were doing me a favor, like they were graciously donating their time to address my unreasonable behavior. "We're concerned about you," David began, using the tone of voice I remembered from his teenage years when he was about to ask for something he knew I wouldn't want to give. "You've been acting strange lately," Rebecca added. "Distant. Unfriendly." I sat in my chair across from them, my hands folded in my lap, and waited for them to continue. I had learned from Marcus Torres that silence is often more powerful than words. "We think you might be depressed," David continued. "Or maybe having some cognitive issues. You've been forgetting to help with things, ignoring our needs." Ignoring their needs. As if my entire purpose in life was to anticipate and fulfill their desires. "We've been talking," Rebecca said, glancing at David, "and we think it might be time to look into some professional help. Maybe some counseling, or medication, or assisted living," David finished. "Just to make sure you're safe and getting proper care." There it was. The solution to their problem disguised as concern for my welfare. If I was in assisted living, they could continue living in my house without the inconvenience of my presence. They could inherit my property without the messy business of waiting for me to die naturally. I looked at my son, searching his face for any sign of the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who cried on my shoulder when his first girlfriend broke up with him, who called me his hero in his high school graduation speech. That boy was gone. In his place sat a middle-aged man who saw his mother as an obstacle to be managed rather than a person to be loved. "I see," I said finally. They waited for me to argue, to justify myself, to beg for their understanding. When I didn't, David's frustration bubbled over. "Don't you have anything to say? Don't you care that we're worried about you?" "I care," I said calmly, "that you think I need professional help because I stopped giving you money." Rebecca's carefully neutral expression flickered. "This isn't about money, Margaret. This is about your well-being." "No," I said, standing up from my chair with a steadiness that surprised me. "This is about your comfort. And your comfort is no longer my responsibility." I walked to my kitchen table and picked up the folder of property documents I had been keeping there for weeks. I brought it back to the living room and set it on the coffee table in front of them. "This is what's real," I said, opening the folder to reveal the deed, the property tax assessments, the insurance documents. "I own this house. I have always owned this house. You have been living here as my guests for 8 years, contributing nothing to the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, or maintenance. David's face went pale. Rebecca's mask of concern slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Mom, you know we appreciate. No, I interrupted, my voice stronger than it had been in years. Let me finish. I sat back down, meeting both of their gazes directly. I have given you thousands of dollars over the years. I have free housing, free utilities, free use of my backyard and storage space. I have cooked for you, cleaned up after you, and asked for nothing in return except basic human decency. The silence in the room was thick with tension. Instead, I continued, I have been treated like a burden, excluded from family gatherings, ignored when I was injured, dismissed when I expressed my needs, and now told I need professional help because I'm not serving you with enough enthusiasm. Rebecca finally spoke, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. We never asked you to do those things. If you felt taken advantage of, you should have said something. I'm saying something now, I replied. I will no longer buy love with my money or my service. I will no longer apologize for existing in my own home. I will no longer accept being treated as less than family while being expected to provide more than family should have to give. David leaned forward, his lawyer training kicking in. Mom, are you threatening to evict us? Because we have rights as tenants, even without a formal lease. You have no rights as tenants, I said, because you've never been tenants. You've been guests. And guests can be uninvited. The words hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time in our relationship, I held all the power, and we all knew it. Rebecca's composure cracked completely. This is unbelievable. After everything we've done for you, after all the time we've spent listening to your problems and helping you with your medications and making sure you weren't lonely, when? I asked calmly. When did you listen to my problems? When did you help with my medications? When did you make sure I wasn't lonely? She floundered, unable to provide a single concrete example. I fell down the basement stairs last month, I continued. You suggested I call a cab. I called out for help, and you didn't even pause your television show. I've eaten dinner alone every night for the past 2 years. When was the last time either of you asked how I was feeling, what I was thinking, or what I might need? David tried a different approach. Mom, we're family. Family doesn't keep score like this. You're right, I said. Family doesn't keep score. Family shows up for each other without being asked. Family includes each other in celebrations. Family treats each other with respect and kindness because they want to, not because they have to. I stood up again, walking to the window that looked out onto the street where I had lived for 37 years. You haven't treated me like family in years, I said without turning around. You've treated me like a service provider who occasionally gets uppity about her working conditions. The room fell silent except for the sound of traffic outside and the ticking of the clock on the mantel, the same clock that had marked time through decades of real family moments, back when we were actually a family. When I turned around, Rebecca was crying, not tears of sadness, but tears of frustration and rage. David looked like he was trying to solve a complex legal problem. So what do you want from us? He asked finally. It was the first time in years that either of them had asked what I wanted instead of telling me what they needed. I want you to decide if you want a relationship with me or if you want free housing, I said. But you can't have both while treating me like neither. I moved toward the door, a clear signal that the conversation was over. You have 30 days to figure out what that looks like. They left without another word, Rebecca's heels clicking angrily on the stairs, David's heavy footsteps following behind her. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood in my living room, surrounded by the silence I had grown to fear, and realized that for the first time in years, I felt peace instead of loneliness. That night, I called Marcus Torres and told him about the conversation. How do you feel? He asked. Scared, I admitted. But also, free. That's exactly what courage feels like, he said. Scared and free at the same time. The next 30 days were unlike anything I had experienced before. The house felt different with the tension finally acknowledged and addressed. I could hear David and Rebecca arguing upstairs, their voices carrying through the thin walls that had never provided much privacy. I started taking walks every morning, exploring neighborhoods I hadn't visited in years. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for when I was busy managing everyone else's needs. Mrs. Rodriguez and I began having coffee together twice a week. She told me stories about her life in Puerto Rico, about the daughter who called her every Sunday, about the grandchildren who visited every month and genuinely seemed happy to see her. The secret, she said one afternoon as we sat on her porch watching the world go by, is teaching people how to treat you. If you don't show them what you're worth, they'll value you at whatever price makes them comfortable. I had spent my life making other people comfortable at the expense of my own comfort. I had been so afraid of being lonely that I had accepted being invisible. I had confused being needed with being loved, being used with being valued. The end of the 30 days came and went without any conversation from David or Rebecca. They continued living upstairs, continued their routines, continued pretending that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I stopped waiting for them to acknowledge me. I stopped hoping for invitations that would never come. I stopped making excuses for their behavior or trying to fix relationships they had no interest in preserving. Instead, I focused on building a life that didn't require their approval or participation. I started attending the senior activities at the local community center. I joined a book club, a walking group, and a volunteer program that delivered groceries to homebound elderly residents. Ironic, perhaps, that I was helping other isolated seniors while learning to break free from my own isolation. The people I met were nothing like the stereotypes I had feared about aging. They were vibrant, engaged, interesting women and men who had lived full lives and weren't ready to disappear just because their children thought they were inconvenient. At the book club, I met Patricia, a retired teacher who had traveled to 37 countries. At the walking group, I met James, a widower who had taken up photography and captured the most beautiful images of Brooklyn's hidden corners. At the volunteer program, I met Elena, a former social worker who had raised 5 children and now helped other families navigate difficult times. These people saw me. They listened when I spoke. They remembered details about my life and asked follow-up questions about things I had mentioned weeks earlier. They laughed at my stories and shared their own with genuine interest in my reactions. I began to remember what it felt like to be valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. 3 months after my confrontation with David and Rebecca, something unexpected happened. I received a letter in the mail from Rebecca's family in New Jersey, the same family whose gathering I had been excluded from when I brought cookies that night that felt like a lifetime ago. The letter was from Rebecca's mother, Carol. "Dear Mrs. Chen," it read. "I hope you don't mind me writing to you directly. Rebecca mentioned that you had some kind of falling out, but she was very vague about the details. I wanted you to know that we enjoyed meeting you at Rebecca's birthday party last spring and were disappointed not to see you at our family gathering in September." I read the letter twice, confused. I hadn't been at Rebecca's birthday party last spring. I hadn't even known there was a birthday party. I called Carol, whose phone number was included in the letter. "Mrs. Chen," she said warmly when I introduced myself. "How wonderful to hear from you. I was just thinking about that lovely conversation we had about your nursing career. My mother was a nurse too, back in the 1950s. I had never spoken to Carol about my nursing career. I had never met Carol at all. "I think there might be some confusion," I said carefully. "I wasn't at Rebecca's birthday party last spring." There was a long pause. "Of course you were, dear. You brought that beautiful chocolate cake and told us all about your son's childhood. You showed us pictures of David playing Little League." My hands began to tremble. "Mrs. Chen, I think you might have me confused with someone else. I'm Margaret. I live downstairs from David and Rebecca, and I wasn't invited to any birthday party." Another long pause, this one heavy with realization. "Oh my goodness," Carol whispered. "Margaret, I'm so sorry. Rebecca told us you were her stepmother who lived in Chicago. She said David's real mother had passed away years ago." The phone nearly slipped from my numb fingers. Rebecca had been pretending to be me at family gatherings. She had taken my stories, my memories, my relationship with my son, and presented them as her own while erasing my existence entirely. "I'm David's mother," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm very much alive, and I live in the house they're staying in." Carol was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. When she spoke again, her voice was filled with horror and confusion. "Margaret, I don't understand. Why would Rebecca lie about something like this? And David went along with it. Why indeed?" The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I couldn't immediately process it. It wasn't just that they had excluded me from their lives, they had actively replaced me, stolen my identity, and allowed Rebecca's family to believe I was dead. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with all the pieces of the puzzle finally visible. The distant treatment, the financial exploitation, the constant suggestions about senior living facilities, the medical and cognitive concerns they had expressed, it all made sense now. They weren't just waiting for me to die naturally. They were systematically erasing me while I was still alive, preparing everyone in their social circle for my absence so that when I was finally gone, the transition would be seamless. The cruelty was breathtaking in its thoroughness. But something unexpected happened as I sat with this revelation. Instead of the crushing despair I had felt for so long, I felt a clean, clear anger that burned away all my confusion and self-doubt. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't too demanding or unreasonable or difficult. I was being systematically abused by people who should have loved me, people I had supported and protected and sacrificed for at the expense of my own well-being. The next morning, I called Marcus Torres and told him everything. "Mrs. Chen," he said after listening to the whole story, "this goes beyond family dysfunction. This is elder abuse, financial exploitation, and possibly fraud. You have grounds for a restraining order and a legal case that could result in serious consequences for both of them. I don't want to destroy them, I said. I just want them to stop destroying me. Sometimes, Marcus replied gently, protecting yourself requires consequences that feel like destruction to the people who have been hurting you. But their discomfort with facing consequences is not your responsibility. That afternoon, I did something I had never done in my 73 years of life. I stopped trying to protect people from the results of their own choices. I called David and asked him to come downstairs for a conversation. When he arrived, looking annoyed at being interrupted from whatever he was doing upstairs in my house, I handed him a packet of legal documents. "What is this?" he asked without looking at them. 30-day notice to vacate, I said calmly. And documentation of the financial exploitation and elder abuse that will be filed with the district attorney's office if you're not moved out by that deadline. His face went white as he flipped through the papers. "Mom, you can't be serious. This is insane." "What's insane," I replied, "is that you've been telling people I'm dead while living in my house and spending my money." He opened his mouth to deny it, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Carol called me yesterday," I continued. "Rebecca's been impersonating me at family gatherings for over a year. Your wife has been stealing my identity, my relationship with you, my memories of your childhood, while you stood by and watched." The documents in his hands were shaking. "Mom, I can explain." "No," I said firmly. "You can't explain. There is no explanation that makes this acceptable. There is no justification that makes this forgivable. There is no apology that undoes this level of betrayal." I stood up, feeling taller than I had in years. "You have 30 days to remove yourselves from my property. If you're not gone by then, the police will remove you. If you attempt to contact me after that, you'll be violating a restraining order." "You're throwing away your only family over money?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "No," I said. "You threw away your only mother over money. I'm just finally admitting that it happened." Rebecca appeared at the top of the stairs, clearly having been listening to the entire conversation. She came down slowly, her face a mask of composed fury. "This is ridiculous, Margaret," she said. "We're not going anywhere, and you can't make us. We have rights." I handed her a duplicate set of legal documents. "Actually, you don't. Marcus Torres is one of the best elder abuse attorneys in New York, and he's very interested in your case. Particularly the identity theft and fraud aspects." She scanned the papers, her composure finally cracking. "You can't prove anything." "Carol has photos from the party where you were pretending to be me," I said. "She has witnesses who heard you claiming to be David's mother. She has your own social media posts where you referred to David's late mother, while sharing stories that only I could have told you." The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of lies and manipulation finally brought into the light. "We gave you purpose," Rebecca said finally, her voice cold with contempt. "You were nothing before we moved in here. Just a lonely old woman with no one who cared about you. At least we made you feel useful." The words were meant to wound me, to make me question my decision, to drive home how alone I would be without them. Instead, they crystallized everything I had come to understand about my situation. "You're right," I said. "I was lonely. But I was never nothing. And the only reason I felt useful to you was because I was letting you use me." I walked to the front door and held it open. 30 days, I said. "Not 31. Not 29 and we'll talk about it. 30 days, and then you're trespassing." They left without another word, and I locked the door behind them. For the first time in 8 years, I was alone in my house, and it felt like coming home to myself. The next month passed in a blur of legal meetings, property preparations, and emotional processing. Marcus Torres helped me document years of financial exploitation. Mrs. Rodriguez helped me find a handyman to change the locks. Helen helped me plan what I wanted to do with my life once I was free to live it on my terms. David and Rebecca moved out on day 29, loading their belongings into a rental truck while avoiding eye contact with me. I watched from my bedroom window as they carried out furniture I had paid for, electronics I had helped them buy, clothes that had been purchased with money I had given them. I felt no satisfaction in watching them go, but I felt no regret either. I was mourning the relationship I had thought we had while celebrating the freedom I was finally claiming. On the first day after they were gone, I woke up in a house that was completely mine. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was peaceful. The space wasn't lonely, it was mine to fill as I chose. I made myself coffee and sat in my kitchen, looking out at the backyard where Rebecca had planted herbs she would never harvest. The garden was overgrown now, wild and beautiful in its abandonment. I decided to leave it that way. That afternoon, I received a call from my granddaughter Emma, David's daughter from his first marriage who lived in California with her mother. "Grandma Maggie," she said, using the nickname she had given me when she was small. "Dad called and said you guys had some kind of fight. He said you're not talking anymore." Emma was 25 now, working as a graphic designer in San Francisco. We had maintained a relationship separate from David and Rebecca through emails and occasional phone calls, but I hadn't seen her in person for 3 years. It's complicated, sweetheart, I said, not wanting to burden her with the details of her father's betrayal. Yeah, that's what Dad said too, she replied. But he wouldn't tell me what happened. And Rebecca posted something on social media about toxic family members that seemed pretty pointed. I took a deep breath, deciding to trust her with the truth. Your father and Rebecca have been living in my house for 8 years without paying rent, I said. They've accepted thousands of dollars from me while treating me like I was an inconvenience. And recently I found out that Rebecca has been telling her family that I'm dead and impersonating me at social events. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Grandma, Emma said finally, are you serious? Very serious, I replied. I asked them to start treating me with basic respect or move out. They chose to move out. Oh my God, she whispered. I knew Rebecca was weird about you, but I had no idea it was that bad. And Dad just went along with it. Your father, I said carefully, has made his choices. I'm coming to visit you, she said suddenly. I've got some vacation time saved up, and I want to see you. Is that okay? For the first time in months, I smiled with genuine joy. Emma, I would love nothing more. 2 weeks later, I picked up my granddaughter at JFK Airport. She looked like David had at her age, tall and lanky with curious eyes and an easy smile. But her hug was real, her interest in my life was genuine, and her love felt like a gift instead of an obligation. We spent a week together, talking about everything and nothing. She helped me paint the upstairs apartment, turning it from the space where David and Rebecca had lived into something entirely new. We chose bright colors and hung artwork from local artists. We planted new flowers in the backyard garden, leaving the wild herbs but adding structure and intentional beauty. You seem different, Grandma, Emma said one evening as we sat on the front porch watching the neighborhood wind down for the night. Happier. More, yourself. I feel more myself, I admitted. It's taken me a long time to remember who that was. Emma curled up next to me on the porch swing, the same swing where David had sat as a child telling me about his day at school. I'm sorry about Dad, she said quietly. I don't understand how he could treat you like that. People change, I said. Sometimes they change into people we don't recognize. Sometimes they change back. But we can't wait around hoping they'll become who we need them to be. Are you lonely? She asked, the question I had been dreading and anticipating. I considered it carefully. Sometimes, I said honestly. But I'm not alone. And I've learned there's a big difference. After Emma returned to California, I threw myself into building the life I had always been too busy to live. I rented out the upstairs apartment to a young nurse who reminded me of myself at that age, hardworking, independent, kind. She paid fair rent and treated the space with respect, asking permission before making changes and including me in her plans when appropriate. I started traveling, something Thomas and I had always planned to do but never found time for. I visited Emma in San Francisco, took a train trip through the Southwest, flew to Ireland to see the places my grandmother had described in her letters. I took art classes, learned to use a computer, started volunteering at a literacy program for adult learners. I made friends who valued my experience and wisdom rather than seeing my age as a limitation. 18 months after David and Rebecca moved out, I received an unexpected phone call. Mom? David's voice was uncertain, almost childlike. My heart jumped at the familiar sound, but I kept my voice steady. Hello, David. I wanted to call and see how you were doing, he said. I'm doing well, I replied, not offering more information. Emma said you've been traveling. That sounds nice. We talked in careful, polite sentences about safe topics, the weather, the neighborhood, my health. Neither of us mentioned Rebecca, the house, the money, or the last 20 months of silence. Mom, he said finally, I was wondering if maybe we could try to. I don't know. Start over? Start over. As if the years of exploitation and betrayal could be erased with good intentions and hopeful thinking. David, I said gently, I love you. You're my son, and that will never change. But starting over requires acknowledging what went wrong the first time. It requires taking responsibility for choices that caused real harm. I know Rebecca made some mistakes. No, I interrupted. Rebecca made choices. You made choices. And those choices showed me exactly how little I mattered to both of you. The line was quiet except for the sound of his breathing. I can't undo what happened, he said finally. No, I agreed. You can't. But you could acknowledge it. You could apologize without making excuses. You could show me through consistent actions over time that you've learned something from the consequences of your behavior. And then we could have a relationship again? I looked out my kitchen window at the garden Emma and I had planted together, now thriving in its second season. Life was complicated and messy and beautiful, and relationships were all of those things too. Maybe, I said. But it would be a different relationship built on different terms. I'm not the same person I was when you left, David. I won't be returning to the woman who accepted being invisible in her own life. We ended the call with tentative promises to talk again soon. He didn't apologize, didn't take responsibility, didn't acknowledge the specific harm he had caused. But he had called, and maybe that was a beginning. Or maybe it wasn't. Either way, I was fine. That evening, I sat on my front porch with Mrs. Rodriguez, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sun set over Brooklyn. We had become genuine friends, two women who had learned to value their own company and weren't willing to accept less than they deserved from others. Any regrets? She asked, a question that had become our evening ritual. I considered it, as I did every time she asked. I regret how long it took me to stand up for myself, I said. I regret teaching my son that I didn't deserve respect by accepting disrespect for so many years. I regret all the energy I wasted trying to earn love from people who had already decided I wasn't worth loving. I took a sip of wine and watched a young couple walk by, holding hands and laughing about something only they understood. But I don't regret the choices I've made since then, I continued. I don't regret demanding better. I don't regret enforcing boundaries. I don't regret refusing to buy love with my money or my silence or my self-sacrifice. Mrs. Rodriguez raised her glass in a toast. To women who learn their worth, she said. To women who teach others their worth, I replied. As the last light faded from the sky, I thought about the woman I had been 3 years ago, invisible, exhausted, desperate for crumbs of affection from people who saw her as expendable. That woman had been so afraid of being alone that she had allowed herself to disappear. The woman I was now understood that being alone and being lonely were different things. She had learned that family is defined by behavior, not biology. She had discovered that respect is not negotiable and love cannot be bought. She had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst impulses by accepting unacceptable treatment. Most importantly, she had learned that it's never too late to save your own life. Now, 3 years after that first confrontation in my living room, I live in a house filled with light and laughter. Emma visits regularly, bringing friends who stay for dinner and treat me like the interesting person I've always been. My tenant Sarah and I have become friends, sharing meals and conversations and the daily rhythms of a home where people actually see and value each other. I volunteer at the legal aid office where Marcus Torres helped me find my strength, assisting other elderly people who are learning to recognize and resist financial and emotional exploitation. I paint watercolors that hang in the local coffee shop, teach literacy classes to adults who never learned to read, and take weekend trips with friends I've made in my book club and walking group. David calls occasionally, usually around holidays or when Emma has told him about something interesting happening in my life. Our conversations are cordial but distant, like acquaintances catching up rather than mother and son reconnecting. He has never apologized, never taken responsibility, never done the work necessary to rebuild trust. Rebecca, I hear through the neighborhood gossip network, married someone else after divorcing David and moved to Connecticut where she works for her father's investment firm. I wish her well from a distance and hope she's learned to build genuine relationships rather than exploiting vulnerable people. But their choices, their growth or lack of growth, their happiness or unhappiness, none of it is my responsibility anymore. I am responsible for my own life, my own choices, my own happiness. And for the first time in decades, I am genuinely, authentically happy. This morning, as I sit in my sunny kitchen with my second cup of coffee, I'm planning a trip to visit Helen at her retirement community in New Jersey. We're going to take a watercolor class together and explore the small towns along the Delaware River. Tonight, Emma is calling to tell me about her new job and the man she's been dating who she thinks I would like. Sarah is making dinner for both of us, trying out a new recipe she learned from her grandmother. Tomorrow, I'm volunteering at the Literacy Center and then meeting Mrs. Rodriguez for our weekly walk through Prospect Park. Next week, I start a photography class that I've been looking forward to for months. These are small things, ordinary moments, and everyday plans. But they represent something that was missing from my life for so many years, the simple joy of being seen, valued, and included by people who choose to be in my life because they want to be, not because they need something from me. Have you ever lived through something like this? Have you ever found yourself disappearing in your own life, becoming invisible while trying to earn love from people who had already decided you weren't worth their genuine attention? Have you ever discovered that the people you were sacrificing everything for saw your sacrifice as evidence of your expendability rather than your love? Have you ever had to choose between being lonely and being disrespected, between solitude and invisibility? I want to hear your stories. I want to know how you found your way back to yourself, or how you're still looking for the path. The comments below are a safe space for truth-telling, for admitting the hard things, for celebrating the small victories that feel enormous when you're the one living them. When I started sharing my story, I never expected the response I received. Hundreds of messages from people who recognized themselves in my experience. Women who had given everything to their children only to be treated like burdens. Men who had sacrificed their retirement savings to support ungrateful adult children. Elderly people who had been systematically isolated and financially exploited by the very family members they had spent their lives supporting. But what surprised me even more were the messages from younger people, adults in their 30s and 40s who recognized their own behavior in David and Rebecca's story. People who had taken advantage of aging parents without realizing the emotional damage they were causing. Adult children who had been so focused on their own convenience that they had forgotten to see their parents as whole human beings deserving of respect and love. These conversations taught me something profound about the nature of courage. It takes courage to stand up for yourself when everyone around you has become comfortable with your silence. It takes courage to demand respect from people who benefit from disrespecting you. But it also takes courage to recognize when you've been the one causing harm, to admit your mistakes, and to do the difficult work of making amends. Some of these conversations led to reconciliation. Adult children reached out to parents they had been taking for granted. Elderly parents found the strength to set boundaries they had been avoiding for years. Families discovered that honest communication, even when it's difficult and painful, can be the foundation for stronger, more authentic relationships. Not every story had a happy ending. Some relationships were too damaged by years of exploitation and betrayal to be repaired. Some people discovered that their family members were simply unwilling to acknowledge the harm they had caused or to make changes necessary for a healthy relationship. But even these painful realizations brought their own kind of freedom. There is something liberating about finally accepting the truth about toxic relationships, about stopping the exhausting work of trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed, about redirecting your energy toward relationships that are reciprocal and nurturing. Through these conversations, I learned that my story wasn't unique. Elder abuse by adult children is more common than most people realize. According to the National Center on Elder Abuse, family members are responsible for 90% of elder abuse cases. Financial exploitation by family members affects an estimated 5 million elderly Americans every year. But the numbers only tell part of the story. Behind each statistic is a human being who spent decades building a life, raising a family, contributing to their community, only to find themselves dismissed and exploited by the people they love most. Behind each case is someone like me, sitting in their own kitchen, wondering when they became invisible in their own life. The isolation that comes with this kind of abuse is particularly cruel. When strangers mistreat us, we can seek help and support without shame. When family members mistreat us, we're often reluctant to speak up because we don't want to burden others with our family problems, or because we're afraid people will think we're lying or exaggerating. Society tells us that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that we should forgive and forget because they're family. These messages make it even harder for abused elderly people to recognize their situation for what it is and to seek help. But I learned something important through my experience. Family is not defined by DNA or marriage certificates. Family is defined by how people treat you. Real family shows up for you. Real family includes you. Real family treats you with respect not because they have to, but because they want to. The people who have become my chosen family, Emma, Mrs. Rodriguez, Helen, Sarah, the friends I've made in my book club and volunteer work, these people see me, value me, and include me in their lives because they choose to, not because they're obligated to by biology. This realization changed everything for me. I stopped trying to earn love from people who had already decided I wasn't worth it, and I started investing in relationships with people who appreciated what I had to offer. The transformation wasn't easy. 73 years of people-pleasing behavior doesn't change overnight. I had to learn to recognize when I was falling back into old patterns of self-sacrifice and boundary crossing. I had to practice saying no without explaining myself. I had to get comfortable with being disliked by people who preferred the version of me that never stood up for herself. But the work was worth it. Every authentic conversation, every boundary maintained, every moment of genuine connection built toward the life I'm living now, a life where I'm seen, valued, and respected. I think often about the woman who sat in her kitchen 3 years ago, surrounded by broken ceramic and broken dreams, finally admitting to herself that she deserved better. She couldn't have imagined the life I'm living now. She was so focused on the relationships she was losing that she couldn't see the relationships waiting to be built. If you're reading this and recognizing yourself in my story, I want you to know that it's not too late. It's never too late to save your own life. It's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. It's never too late to stop accepting crumbs of affection from people who should be offering you the full meal of love and inclusion. Yes, it's scary. Yes, you might lose some relationships. Yes, you might face a period of loneliness as you adjust to a life where you're not constantly trying to earn love through service and sacrifice. But on the other side of that fear is a life where you're not invisible. On the other side of those lost relationships are new ones built on mutual respect and genuine affection. On the other side of that loneliness is solitude, the peaceful space where you can finally hear your own thoughts and honor your own needs. The changes don't have to be dramatic. You don't have to serve eviction notices or hire attorneys or cut contact completely, though sometimes those steps become necessary. Sometimes change starts with simply saying, "That doesn't work for me," when someone makes unreasonable demands on your time or money. Sometimes it starts with stopping the constant apologies for existing, for having needs, for taking up space. Sometimes it starts with asking yourself, what would I do if I weren't afraid of this person's reaction? Sometimes it starts with recognizing that people who truly love you don't want you to disappear for their convenience. People who truly love you want you to be visible, present, authentic. They want to know what you think, how you feel, what you need. They include you not because they have to, but because they want to. As I write this, spring is arriving in Brooklyn again. The garden Emma and I planted is showing its first green shoots. Mrs. Rodriguez is planning her annual summer barbecue, and she's already asked me to make my chocolate chip cookies, the same recipe I once offered to Rebecca's family, but now shared with people who actually want them, who actually want me. Sarah stopped by this morning to ask if I wanted to join her for a movie tonight. Helen called to tell me about a photography exhibition she thinks I'd enjoy. Emma sent pictures of her latest art project, asking for my opinion not because she has to, but because she values what I think. These are the small moments that make up a life lived on your own terms. These are the relationships that feed your soul instead of draining it. This is what it feels like to be seen, valued, and loved for who you are rather than what you can provide. David still calls occasionally, and our conversations are slowly becoming warmer. He's started to acknowledge, in small ways, the mistakes he made during those 8 years. He hasn't offered a full apology, hasn't taken complete responsibility, but he's beginning to see me as a person rather than a service provider. I'm open to building a new relationship with him, but only on terms that honor both of us. I won't return to being invisible for his comfort, and I won't pretend that the past didn't happen for the sake of peace. If we're going to have a relationship, it will be an honest one, built on mutual respect rather than obligation. The house feels different now. The walls that once felt like a prison now feel like home. The silence that once felt empty now feels peaceful. The space that was once divided between what was mine and what I was allowing others to use is now entirely, completely mine to fill as I choose. Sometimes I find myself in the kitchen where I had my breakdown 3 years ago, looking at the spot where the coffee cup shattered into so many pieces. The floor has been repaired, new tiles laid, but I can still remember the sound of ceramic breaking, the metaphor of my life scattered across the linoleum. That moment of breaking was also the moment when I started putting myself back together, piece by piece, choosing more carefully this time what deserved a place in my reconstructed life. If this story resonated with you, if it felt familiar in ways that made your heart ache or your spirit soar, please like this video and subscribe. Share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to save your own life, that family is defined by behavior rather than biology, that respect is not negotiable no matter how desperately you want to be loved. Together, maybe we can build a community of people who understand that growing older doesn't mean accepting less than we deserve. Maybe we can teach each other that wisdom and experience and decades of giving have earned us the right to expect basic human decency from the people who claim to love us. Maybe we can learn together that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is refuse to disappear in your own life. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for reminding me that I was never nothing, even when I forgot that truth myself. Now I want to hear yours.